forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Deace.
And greetings. Welcome to this week's episode of Bigger 10. Steve Deace here alongside my co-host, Aaron McIntire. Good to see you again, brother. How are you?
You know, I'm doing well. Despite the fact that the weather went from summer back to like November or October this week, I'm doing pretty well.
You know what, though? That should get you in the mood for what we're going to do this week on Bigger 10, because spring football practice is wrapped up across the conference. So we thought we would take a look back and then kind of gaze forward at what should be some of the big questions still to be answered with Big Ten spring football. So we're going to spend a segment here doing 5 questions about the East. Then after the break, we'll do 5 questions on the West Division as well. You ready to go?
Absolutely.
Let's begin with the East Division. And I think the biggest question of them all is the quarterback competition in Columbus. First of all, is there really a competition? This is the most important position on the team. This is, right now, I don't like saying it, but it is the truth, the most important program in our league. And this really isn't about whether Ohio State's going to win the Big Ten. They are. This is really about whether they'll be able to be one of those final 4 teams standing in the playoff at the end of the year. They've recruited well enough in the other 21 positions to win the league just in those spots. I mean, they basically beat Northwestern last year with Justin Fields having his worst game as a Buckeye, remember. So this really is about, though, that quarterback position, right? That's the position that decides just where you're at in the elite hierarchy. Are you one of those 4 teams this year? C.J. Stroud was a top 100 recruit 2 years ago. He set last year behind Justin Fields. He's been the presumed starter, but it's a full quarterback room at Ohio State. Jack Miller was a big-time recruit. The 5-star that just came in, Kyle McCord, early enrollee. He's got the biggest recruiting profile of any of the guys they've signed. Now, some of this could just be Ryan Day realizing we got this thing called the transfer portal. So everybody's in the starting quarterback competition until September the 4th, and then one guy has to start, right? But I think this is the biggest question in this division right now, because I think it goes directly, Aaron, to whether Ohio State's not just going to be the best team in the Big Ten, they will be, but whether they'll be one of the 4 best teams at the end of the season in the country.
Yes, and that second thing that you mentioned there, that at all the other positions they've recruited at the highest of levels, that's the most important factor here. So there's no real mystery. It's just the only mystery here is the point differential, really. That's the mystery. How good of a quarterback are they going to be able to get? I believe it was Justin Fields who transferred from Georgia in the middle of one summer, correct? A few years ago when he transferred, but he still didn't play that following fall, if I remember correctly as well. It's not like you can go out in the transfer portal at the college level, just get a plug-and-play guy, unless you're really, really desperate.
No, he did play right away.
Oh, he did play right away.
Yes.
Well, goodness gracious. Well, as we saw from his career, Justin Fields don't just grow on trees, but that type of talent is very, very rare. You can't normally just go out and get a guy who can fit into your offense right away, who can go out there and in his career throw 69 to 11
yes.
touchdowns to interceptions.
At Michigan, we've tried this with a few transfer quarterbacks, even one who was a 5-star. It ain't easy to do.
So Justin Fields don't just grow on trees. So don't get this confused here. There's no debate about whether or not Ohio State is going to win the Big Ten again this year. It's just the point differential and how much or how far can they go with whatever quarterback they end up with. So I wouldn't necessarily be concerned about the Big Ten if I were a Buckeye fan. I think this year, though, will be rather pivotal, if that's even possible, in talk about Ryan Day, because now you're starting to get, especially at the quarterback position, you're starting to get some of his guys in. How good of a coach is he really? Now, he's not a bad coach. You don't go to the national championship in a COVID year by being a bad coach, but at least you can dispel all of the talk, and there hasn't really been a heck of a lot of it, but any remaining talk there might be that, well, these are all just Urban Meyer's holdouts. We'll see what Ryan Day does when he gets Ryan Day's guys in there. And so that's really going to be the mystery. And I wouldn't even say a concern for Buckeye fans, because y'all got it really good. But that's kind of the question mark, I would say, going into this year and following years with the Buckeyes.
Let's go to the team formerly known as Ohio State's rival. That's Michigan. Massive reboot. It's essentially a coaching change at Michigan, except for the head coach. New recruiting coordinator. Everything's new. 6 other new assistant coaches, including both coordinators. Actually, in both cases, it's 4 core coordinators, both on offense and defense, and neither of the 4 has ever actually coordinated before. You've got a rookie safeties coach who's never even coached in college football. The offensive line coach has never coached the offensive line ever before. I mean, they have hit a Control-Alt-Delete button, and this is going to be one of the youngest teams in the conference as well. So it really just comes down to Michigan is trying to do, and Jim Harbaugh is trying to emulate what Brian Kelly did. There was a lot of talk that Brian Kelly's program at Notre Dame had kind of peaked and then petered out. They had the 4-8 season in 2016. Kelly did this exact same thing, brought in all kinds of new coaches, right down to the recruiting coordinator, reinvented himself as a head coach, more of a facilitator, a guy that was closer to his players and less of the actual play caller. And you've seen the results for Notre Dame ever since. They've been to the playoff now twice. They've had an undefeated regular season. He's clearly reestablished himself. This is a case where I think Jim Harbaugh is trying to emulate the exact same Brian Kelly playbook. And my guess is it's one or the other, that it will work or blow up. I don't think it'll just kind of work with this much newness. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it either catches fire and they shock everybody, or by like the 1st of November, we've got a Michigan coaching hot board. That's what I think.
I wax in between consoling you and trolling you when it comes to Michigan football, but hardly ever am I able to give you some optimism. So let me give you a couple of areas of optimism for Michigan football. First of all, and then finally, I'm sorry, man. I hear you, man. I see with Notre Dame, it seemed, now whether or not the perception that I have is actually what happened is not. It seemed like those coaches from those changes that you just mentioned from Notre Dame, it seemed like they were coming from the head coach himself. It seems like these changes are coming from crap, I'm trying to keep my job. Those are 2 very different motivations. You're just trying stuff. Well, you could say that Notre Dame did that too, but I think there was a realization, some self-awareness that, hey, this staff I've got right now at Notre Dame, it's not going to cut it. We got to blow things up. I hope that's what's happening for your sake at Michigan. I'm not sure that I buy into that yet. So I'm not really sure what to say about Michigan, other than nothing matters. Nothing matters until they kick off. Nothing. Now, doing Michigan podcast with you or helping you with that, I follow Michigan football a lot closer than most other Big Ten fans do, or at least I have to anyway. I'm accidentally following them a lot closer. I get this. I get this hype machine that they have going over there. I'm not sure how you do that, but they find a way to do that. I don't believe anything you see necessarily in Michigan media regarding hype. Just rely on what your own eyes tell you come September.
Well, if Michigan is trying to reboot, when was the last time we said Indiana is reloading? But they are. Now, they're bringing back 17 starters from last year, but The few starters they lost were all major contributors, like their all Big Ten safety, Jamar Johnson. You look at, of course, Whop Philyor, who was a standout slot receiver for the last couple of years. Stevie Scott, who was their bell cow running back, right? So they don't lose much, but what they do lose is meaningful. And of course, this spring, they did not have Michael Penix, who is still recovering from an ACL. And now he has been sensational in the 2 glimpses we've had of him as a college quarterback. But Aaron, they've both been glimpses. He's had season-ending injuries both of his first 2 seasons in college football. So where's Indiana right now when you talk about them as a reload? Is there enough culture and the like there that we just assume they've got people to replace the key contributors that they've lost? And then how much of a factor is the health of Michael Penix in all of this?
I think the number one thing about Indiana is that last year was not a one-off. They were building something there. They were building up to something there. And so that was kind of a natural progression more than it was a one-off situation. So despite those key departures, I'm still pretty bullish on Indiana. And speaking as an Iowa fan, a quarterback with glimpses of greatness from Indiana coming in with a bunch of reloading talent coming in, and you got to play those guys right off the bat. As an Iowa fan, we don't hit the ground running. We just do not. It scares the heck out of me. And I'm hearing about an Indiana quarterback who's showing flashes of greatness. I'm already having flashbacks to, I think it was Antoine Randall.
Yeah.
I mean, no, please no. So I'm not looking forward to that. I think Indiana is still in a really good position. They're not going to, obviously contend in the East against Ohio State, but they're going to be at the very least a tough out for basically everybody that they play. Now, talking about a key injury and a key position, quarterback would be that as well. When you're reloading, though, with the type of program Indiana has, I don't think the depth behind most of their starters is going to necessarily be the type of depth that we talk about other teams who actually reload on a perennial basis having. So they are, I will say this, 2 or 3 or maybe 1 or 2 more key injuries to key starters away from tanking pretty quickly, but I think they're in a good position right now.
My team total talent ratings, which we'll update post-spring next week on Michigan Podcast, say exactly what you just pointed out. The starters returning, those frontline guys are pretty close to as good as what they had last year. Depth-wise, though, they're not as deep as they were a year ago. So the ability to sustain a few injuries, they may not be able to do that if that were to happen to them. Let's go to Michigan State next, which has kind of become Sparty Transfer U, not just in the East Division, but the Big Ten. Now, Illinois did this successfully a couple of years ago with Lovie Smith to save his job for at least a year and get to a bowl game. Mel Tucker's trying to follow in that path. I think the numbers, they're into the 20s. In terms of guys that have both transferred in and transferred out. Just this recruiting cycle alone at Michigan State, it looks like maybe the Temple transfer could end up being their starting quarterback as well. And so I think you're going to see more and more of this. We saw Rutgers do this successfully last year. You're going to see more and more coaches now just use the transfer portal to try to rebuild on the fly rather than taking that kind of year zero we're used to seeing. So what do you think this does in terms of getting Michigan State football back to where we saw it for a decade under Mark D'Antonio?
Yeah, I would agree about seeing this more often to try to rebuild with a jump start. The Illinois thing, that's a one-off. Rutgers thing, that's a coincidence. Now, if this works at Michigan State this year, we're going to see a trend. That is a trend in one conference. That's just one conference, and so I think they will be intriguing. I'm not sure what we can actually expect from them, but I think they will at the very least be intriguing, and I'm not sure if there's a whole lot more to say than that. Well,
here's some intrigue. Bill Connolly over at now ESPN, formerly of SB Nation. I'm a huge fan of his analytics because I think he was the first person to find a way to kind of crack the code where we can't just use returning starters and sizing teams up in the preseason the way we used to, with early enrollees and sub packages and everything else. So he did it based on returning production. Well, lo and behold, look which team returns the most total production in our conference. Maryland does. That usually, When you're a team that returns a lot of production in Bill Connolly's metric, that usually is indicative of a team that's going to take a big step when we come to the fall. Aaron, your thoughts?
I just don't get Maryland. I haven't gotten them for the last 3, 4, 5 years because they've recruited at a level that you would expect, a team with more wins and more key wins to recruit at. Now, they might be turning a corner this year with the returning production that you just mentioned, but I don't know. I'm in a show me place with Maryland.
Well, your coach, Mike Loxley, has the worst record of any head coach in college football history. That might have something to do with it.
Something to do with that.
But if you look at this division, Michigan State, Michigan, Indiana, Rutgers, wouldn't you say those are all winnable games?
Sure. Yeah. So,
and then you start thinking, I don't know what I think they have West Virginia in the non-conference. That won't be easy. Penn State has just owned them for 100 years, right? But
if they can at least be competitive with Penn State, I think that's a step forward. Mm-hmm. Because I remember a couple of years ago, Maryland had put up just some ungodly
Loxley's first
margins.
Year. Yeah, they like 100 points the first 2 weeks of the season.
Exactly. Yeah, some ungodly winning margins their first couple of games. Finally, Maryland, Penn State is back, and then Penn State just happened.
It was one of those big Friday night events, sold out. Yep. The president at Maryland gave the students the day off to sell the place out, and it was over early. Yeah. All right, we'll come back. Take a look at key questions coming out of spring ball for the Big Ten West next. All right, back here on Bigger Ten, it's our special edition post-spring football here in the Big Ten Conference. We looked at 5 key questions facing the Big Ten East just a few moments ago. Aaron, let's take a look at 5 key questions facing the Big Ten West. Let's start with your team, Iowa. We did this with Ohio State. Now, is there really a quarterback battle there? And we did that on the basis of they have these 3 highly recruited kids, and you don't want any of them transferring if you're Ryan Day, right? So you keep the competition open to the very end. I don't get the sense, even like the rebooted Kirk Ferentz we saw after last year's scandal. I just don't see Kirk as the guy that coaches with the transfer portal in mind. Okay. So is Spencer Petras, is he really on notice here? Because I just don't see Kirk playing these kinds of games. So I'm inclined to say, there's a real quarterback competition at Iowa.
Yeah, I just ended the last segment talking about Maryland. I'll believe it when I see it. Show me that you're capable. I'll believe it when I see it at Iowa, because it seems like every other year or so, either it's in the lead up to finding a replacement for the previous quarterback, or it's after the first year of the replacement quarterback. Mm-hmm. It seems like, we're really opening things up this year, and we're going to have a quarterback competition. They may not use those words, but that's the implication as well. I don't really see this being a true competition. There's the circle of trust when it comes to Kirk Ferentz. You have to work very hard to get within that circle of trust. But I'm talking about off the field and on the field as well. I need to know that you're not going to make stupid decisions, stupid risks, even if it means that you're not going to be as aggressive as you might need to be in some situations as well. That's what the circle of trust is. And so I think Petras obviously broke into that circle of trust. Now, the thing with him is he didn't have a spring practice period last season, obviously. What will he look like this year? There is a perception that he got better as the season wore on last year, and that's true in some respects. He's got some weapons, Tyrone Tracy, Sam Laporta. Those are some good weapons, obviously, as well. Tyler Goodson, there's a lot of hype around him again this year, as there should be. But I don't really see them going anywhere else. If they did go somewhere else, my personal preference, just because, now I haven't seen him actually play. He was, other than his high school ball, Deuce Hogan out of Texas. The dude has swagger. He just has swagger. I think he's a natural leader of men out there. Much more than Nate Stanley was. I know Spencer Petras, they say he's much more of a natural leader than Stanley was as well, who he replaced. So I don't know really what to expect, but I wouldn't expect a huge coaching change or a quarterback change. And if there was one to take place, I would love to see what Deuce Hogan could do.
Well, you look at those first 2 games. You mentioned one of them already against Indiana. And the next week, now y'all have had Matt Campbell's number at Iowa State, but this is a preseason. They're going to be consensus preseason top 10 team. So those first two games, if Spencer Petras wins the job, he comes out and struggles in those first two games. I could see them make a move following that. All right, staying with the Big Ten West now. And Nebraska may have had, I'm guessing this is the largest crowd we have seen for a sporting event or any public event in America, other than the Texas Ranger opening day about a month ago. It's at least the biggest we have seen in our footprint, the crowd that Nebraska put together for its spring game. Now, it's not quite been 2 weeks since that game. It will be this weekend. So I guess we'll go out there and see if that what that did to the epidemiological curve there in the state of Nebraska. Remember, they were the first state to have massive fans at a sporting event last summer when they had about 4,000 or 5,000 at the state high school football all-star game. But I mean, look at this crowd. This is incredible. All right. I mean, that is an incredible crowd for a spring game, period, let alone during a pandemic. When you saw that visual, you thought what? And what do you think this portends in terms, Aaron, of what we could see for crowds for Big Ten football games this fall?
Really depends on the location. I think in places like Nebraska, I don't know really what the Big Ten's
like, would they let some teams have a better home field advantage because of the state? See, the Big Ten doesn't typically roll that way. I could see like an SEC doing that, but I could see the Big Ten saying no one can have more than 50 or 70% capacity, as opposed to, hey, if I go to Nebraska, I'm facing a sellout crowd. I go play Michigan with Gretchen Whitmer, and there's 30,000 people in the stands, right? I just can't see the Big Ten operating like that. Yeah,
so I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last guidance we heard from the Big Ten was just prior to, I think, baseball season, where they essentially said, follow your local guidelines. Follow your local guidelines. Now, local as in state or local as in the college counties, college cities, counties, or cities themselves. So I don't know. That's going to be a lot of finagling. I would just say in places like Iowa, where, this is, other than Iowa and Iowa State, these are basically the only shows in town. We don't have pro teams, etc. They still rely and they still expect a lot of crowds year in and year out, to where it's a significant portion of their budget. So I think the pressure to fully open up the stadiums in places like Iowa and Nebraska are going to be a lot higher than they are, say, in Minneapolis, a lot higher than they are in either of the Michigan schools, etc. So I hope this is a sign of things to come, because I want to hear and I want to see the crowds again. But I'm not as optimistic in all places.
Let's talk Wisconsin. And to me, I think the big question for them coming out of spring is I think, for the first time since Alvarez established them as a power with that shocking 1993 Rose Bowl winning team. So we're going back now, almost 30 years. I think for the first time, I'm questioning the state of the culture there. You look at their statistical profile last year, they outgained opponents by almost 100 yards a game. And yet, we saw them struggle last season after that brilliant debut by Graham Mertz against Illinois. Remember that?
Yeah.
And then it was all downhill afterwards. We would have never predicted. We said this all last fall. If we were going to cast lots, which Big Ten programs get absolutely wrecked by failure to keep COVID protocols, Wisconsin would have probably been, or Northwestern would have been the two last on the list, right? Their season completely fell apart from an inability to keep COVID protocols. And it wasn't just during the year. You can say, well, Steve, everybody gets it. Remember, they had to shut things down in the summer during camp as well. So this was systemic for them. They could not keep COVID protocols in what is maybe the most buttoned down culture in the last 3 decades in our conference. The aforementioned Alvarez now retiring. This is the first time I wonder, is the culture there, all good things, as Q once said to Jean-Luc Picard, must come to an end. Hey, I'm a Michigan fan. I know plenty about once great vaunted programs that can't keep it going forever, okay? But you just, for the first time, I can't go into a season just thinking I know what Wisconsin football is, and then it's just a matter of how good they are within that paradigm, right? This is the first time in many, many years I'm kind of wondering, where's the Wisconsin program at right now?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it could be one of these things where we're having questions like this. It's legitimate now, and then
they're 11-1 at the end of the year,
and then by the second weekend in October, we're like, oh, okay, nothing's changed. I hate my life. If you're an Iowa fan,
but they got a tough opener against Penn State
exactly.
too.
So they've got a tough opener, and what is Wisconsin's identity? At least from my standpoint, their identity has been big uglies and an elite running back on offense, and then just stifling defense in their best teams. Stifling defense that gets after the quarterback on their best teams. That's what every team's identity on defense, I get that, wants to be. But big uglies, great running back. To where it opens up the passing game because teams are overcompensating for your big uglies and your amazing running back. Last year, they didn't have that. So you put a lot of pressure on a freshman quarterback, or at least a first-year starting quarterback in Graham Mertz. Mm-hmm. And he might have been able to flash that for one game. Illinois was not what we thought they were, as we saw last year as well, going into the season. So you're putting a lot more pressure on that first-year starting quarterback. Looked great, but then when teams figured out, hey, you actually don't have as good of a running game as you had when you had Melvin Gordon and all those other guys, we're going to sell out, or we're just going to sit back and play in our base defense because we just don't respect your running game. I think that's my theory of what happened last year, aside from crashing and burning because of COVID. That's my theory, and I'm going to stick by that until I see something different, because I would say usually when cultures come down, they come crashing down. I didn't really see that last year. At least I didn't see an excuse for that last year, or evidence of that last year, because last year could have been used as an excuse.
It's the COVID one-off.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I'm with Wisconsin. We'll see this year. I think that question will be answered one way or another this year. I think if there's fractures in the culture there, we'll be able to see that pretty quickly. If not, then like you said, 11-1.
Let's go to Northwestern next. So they went 8-1 in the West, then 1-8, then come back last year, win it again. This year, though, they lose a ton. They went to the state of South Carolina again to get a transfer quarterback. This one from South Carolina. They did that a couple of years ago with the kid from Clemson. It didn't work. Okay, and they went 1-8 in the division that year. But they've also got a big culture change going on. Mike Hankwitz, their celebrated defensive coordinator, last year was his swan song, and man, did he go out with a bang with that effort in the Big Ten championship game. First of all year long, but then the effort they gave in the championship game against that loaded Ohio State squad, winning the bowl game, winning the West. Mike Hankwitz, gets a Buddy Ryan level of send-off, but this is a new era now for Northwestern. He's been every bit as linked to the success of that program in the Pat Fitzgerald era as Pat has been himself, and they don't reload there, right, with the way they recruit. So Northwestern is kind of rebooting itself as well.
Yep, there's two ways this can go. One is the DC and the head coach are just not simpatico, because Pat Fitzgerald is that team. He is that team. He is that identity. There's no question about that. So the new DC could be simpatico with the old one and the head coach, which is what happened, honestly, at Iowa after Norm Parker decided to move on and then a couple of years ago pass away with Phil Parker. Phil Parker was simpatico with Norm Parker, a little bit different, few differences, but also simpatico with Kirk Ferentz. If they really grasp that over there in Evanston, which I have no reason to doubt that they do, then I don't think they're going to see much of a drop off in the defense they've come to expect over there. So, but if that doesn't happen, if for whatever reason the new DC just doesn't really get it or doesn't really understand for some reason what Fitzgerald is all about and what his philosophy is, then that's going to be an uh-oh.
Finally, I just thought if we were going to do 10 of these, 5 in each division, at some point we had to mention the kicking game. Right? So let's go with Minnesota. Minnesota lost at least 2 games last year because of the kicking game. And brother, their kickers were brutal in the spring. So they've got 2 transfers coming in this summer. They better hope one of those pans out. But, we've talked about margin for error with the expectations of your program. With Ohio State, their expectation every year is the playoff. And so you need a team with a special quarterback. They can't just be good, special. All right, in order to make that happen. We started with Iowa. They ended the year next to Ohio State, the hottest team in our league at the end of the season. But now they've opened up their quarterback race. It seemed often Iowa was winning in spite of Spencer Petras a year ago. Yeah. So you look for margin for error. And if you're PJ Fleck, this is a big year for you to bounce back. Right? You had the steady build up for a year. You get to a bowl game and win it in year 2. You have the massive breakthrough and a top 10 team in year 3. And then last year, your culture kind of came apart on you in a COVID year when there's a lot of other controversies in your state and a lot of talk that you were one of the teams voting against playing. Right? This is the year you want to reassert yourself. Tanner Morgan is back. You want to make sure that people know that 2019 wasn't a flash in the pan. You want to reassert yourself as an 8-9 win kind of a program again. Well, with the margin for error we're dealing with, man, kicking game matters. So we've got 2 transfer kickers coming into our league to Minnesota after graduation in June. Those can end up being the 2 most, one of them anyway, because you only use 1 kicker at a time, unless you tried something. They might need maybe 2, the way they kicked last year. But that one, whoever that kicker transfer is that emerges, could end up being quietly as big of an impact transfer as we have coming into our conference, because that might be the difference in whether this is a team scuffling to make a bowl game and then we start questioning has the boat crashed, or is this an 8-9 win team again and we're still rowing the boat there with PJ Fleck?
Maybe it's just my personality, or maybe it's just my age now, which I'm not that old. I understand.
The ripe old age of 26. Yes.
28. Thank you very much. Those 2 years are really
Yes, you grew a lot between 26 and 28. Yeah. I remember that 20 years ago.
But yes. I don't know about you when you were my age even. How many games I've seen, whether it's the Chiefs, which is my team in the NFL, or whether it's Iowa, they look in the first quarter on offense like they are dominating. They go down, score a touchdown, 3 and out, go down, score a touchdown, 3 and out, go down, kick a field goal to go up 3 scores, from chip shot range, and they miss it. And you immediately start clutching your nuts. Crap, that's going to come back to haunt us later.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying a majority of the time it does, but it has. And those games are the ones that you tend to remember or try to forget. So yeah. Kickers are a big deal. I used to just cringe so much when Iowa media would start talking about the punter, because it was always tongue-in-cheek, haha, we're Iowa, we like the punting game, until I started to realize how important actually punting is to Iowa. What is the phrase? Punting is winning. Mm-hmm. How huge 10 yards is when it comes to setting up your defense and what you're trying to accomplish. Those winning in the margin types of plays, and when it becomes even more important when it's the kicking game and scoring is involved. So yeah, I mean, if you're Minnesota, you're trying to get into that elite category, as PJ Fleck likes to say. Well,
not just feeling elite, you want to be an elite.
You want to be elite.
Yeah.
You still don't have the margin for error that an Ohio State does, or even a Michigan should have, or a Penn State in good years has. You still have to make the most of every single opportunity you get to score. And so, there's going to be a lot of intrigue around that this summer in Minneapolis.
We'll come back and we'll wrap things up with the results of our Twitter poll and feedback of the week next. This week's Twitter poll, I decided to ask this question after seeing that Nebraska crowd. Should Big Ten universities demand proof of COVID vaccination to attend a football game this fall? Now, I had no idea how our Bigger Ten following would react to this question. But wow, this is a resounding no. 76.6% of you said that. No, it should not. 23.4% of you said yes. Big Ten universities should demand proof of COVID vaccination to attend a football game this fall. You have any thoughts on those results, Aaron?
I think this particular issue has pretty broad-based support, because I think people it's pretty easy to see the slippery slope that this is, especially with this particular circumstance as well. where it's we're still early in this vaccine's history. It's experimental. And so I think people are. See, I'm waxing back and forth on this particular show between, just brutal honesty and tongue-in-cheekness.
Yeah.
I think there's pretty broad-based support or broad-based pushback, I should say, against the concept of showing your papers for basically anything.
This week's feedback of the week comes from Brett Johnson, who says, man, looking at those NFL draft stats, no one does less with more than Michigan. And he's right. In the last 3 years alone, Michigan has had 21 players drafted. Only 3 schools have had more players drafted than that. And those last 3 Michigan football teams lost 3 games, 4 games, and then last year had a losing record, 2-4. So a team that had a program that has had 21 draft picks in the last 3 years has lost 11 games in the last 3 years as well.
All right. So I'm not trolling you this time. I do have some reason for optimism, for actual optimism. And again, this is prefaced, I should say, by what I said earlier. Don't believe anything you see, hear, read in the media regarding Michigan until you see things, good or bad, until you see the team kick off. Just from the outside looking in, I think this is the least hype a Michigan team
that's true.
has had since Jim Harbaugh has been there.
That's true. Maybe that I can remember like in my lifetime.
A bunch of 18 to 22-year-old kids who are you still have a good recruiting there, do you not? You still have pretty good recruiting there.
They actually just recruited a top 10 class last year while going 2-4.
Great talent. They're still no less dudes than anybody else on any locker room in any team across the country.
You give me the spiel. This could work the other way now. That suddenly these guys have a chip on their shoulder again.
That's what you got to be hoping for if you're Michigan. And being that this is the least hype, you want that actually at this juncture. You need something or someone or some force to light a fire, not only under the coaches, but under these guys' butts as well. Because I don't really think it was all the players, the Jimmies and Joes, for the disappointment of the last 2-3 years. I don't always think it was the Jimmies and Joes, but it certainly doesn't help. It doesn't hurt, I should say, to have a chip on your shoulder going into a season. So there's some, I guess, out of the side of my mouth, optimism for you.
I just want a definitive verdict.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to go like 7-5 or 6-6. Either suck or soar.
That would suck.
Okay. Soar. So we. Okay. You know what? Jimmy's back. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay. Have like a Big Ten Coach of the Year type of year, or let's have a definitive statement that this thing's done, and so we can get as the great prophet Guffman once, or Corky once said in Waiting for Guffman, got to make a clean cut here. Got to make a clean cut. All right. And so we just move on and we just go ahead and we hire Matt Campbell. All right, Aaron, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger Ten. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, share, whichever the case may be. If it's YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whichever method you use to access us, we appreciate that. Keep doing that. Keep sharing it with other Big Ten sports fans that you know. Until the next time, I'm Steve Deace for Aaron McIntire right here on Bigger Ten.